All right, let's dive right in, because today we are tackling a really big one. It's one of the most challenging and honestly most counterintuitive ideas in all of philosophy. We're going to break down the argument that it might actually be better to have never been born at all. Now, I know that sounds incredibly extreme, but the logic behind it is surprisingly powerful, and that's exactly what we're here to understand.
And this idea isn't even new. This old Jewish saying just nails the core sentiment, right? The suggestion that existence itself is so packed with hardship that not existing would have been the better deal. This really provocative thought is the launching pad for the philosophy we're exploring today, which goes by the name of antinatalism.
So, to wrap our heads around such a wild conclusion, the argument doesn't start with anything crazy or controversial. Nope. In fact, it starts on the most solid ground you can imagine, a simple, universal truth that pretty much every single person can agree on.
This right here is the foundation. I mean, just think about it for a second. No matter who you are, how rich, how lucky, how blessed, your life is going to have bad stuff in it. Pain, disappointment, anxiety, grief, and it all ends with death. The source material puts it simply, bad things happen to all of us. This isn't about being a pessimist, it's just a stone-cold fact about being human. And accepting this is step one. Okay, so with that common ground established, here's where the argument makes its biggest and most important move. It introduces a concept called the asymmetry, and this is really the logical engine that drives this entire philosophy. It's all about a fundamental imbalance between the good stuff and the bad stuff, especially when you compare existing to not existing.
So what in the world is this asymmetry? Well, it's the idea that there's a critical moral difference between pain and pleasure. The way we value the absence of pain is fundamentally different from how we value the absence of pleasure. The best way to see this is to just visualize it with two simple scenarios. First up, scenario A. A person exists. This is us. This is easy, right? For someone who is alive, feeling pain is clearly bad, and feeling pleasure is clearly good. Simple, intuitive, we're all on the same page here. This is our baseline. But now let's look at scenario B, where a person never exists. And this is the whole game, right here. The absence of pain. Well, that's good. It's a good thing that a non-existent person doesn't have to suffer. But, and here's the key, the absence of pleasure is not bad. Why? Because there's no one there to be deprived of that pleasure. You can't miss out on a party you were never invited to if you don't exist in the first place. That's the asymmetry.
So when you put it all together and weigh it on the scales, the argument becomes crystal clear. On the existent side of the ledger, you have guaranteed pain, which is bad. On the non-existent side, you have the guaranteed absence of pain, which is good. And those pleasures of life, they don't tip the scale back, because for the person who never existed, there's no one being deprived of them, so it's not a bad thing. Logically, the asymmetry gives a clear advantage to never coming into being.
Okay, but I can already hear what you might be thinking. What about the actual quality of our lives? This leads to the most obvious objection, and don't worry, the argument is ready for it. We've talked about the logic, but what about how we actually feel about being alive? Exactly. You ask most people, and they'll tell you, yeah, my life is good. I'm glad I was born. So doesn't that just completely wreck this whole idea that existence is a harm? Well, the next part of this argument suggests that maybe, just maybe, we're not the most reliable witnesses when it comes to our own well-being.
The argument here is that our brains are kind of hardwired to see life through rose-tinted glasses. First, there's something called Pollyannaism. It's a known optimism bias. We tend to remember the good stuff way more than the bad. Second, we adapt. Humans are amazing at getting used to bad situations. Our expectations shift, and what was once awful starts to feel normal. And third, we're constantly comparing ourselves to others. We often judge how we're doing by looking at people who have it worse, which naturally makes our own problems seem smaller.
So let's take that final step and see how this all comes together. When you combine that logical asymmetry we just talked about with this idea that our own feelings about happiness might be a bit unreliable, you arrive at the central and, yes, very shocking conclusion of antinatalism. And there it is, the final takeaway. If the absence of pain is good and the absence of pleasure is neutral, then bringing someone into existence guarantees they will suffer harms they otherwise would have completely avoided, all for the sake of pleasures they would never have been deprived of. Following this logic, creating a new life means, by definition, inflicting a serious harm. And to really illustrate the weight of that conclusion, the source uses this incredibly powerful metaphor. It frames having a child not as giving a gift, but as playing a game of Russian roulette. You can never know the kind of suffering your child might face, from the everyday struggles to unimaginable tragedies. It's a gamble, and, according to this view, it's a gamble played with someone else's life. So after walking through that entire chain of reasoning, from a simple truth to a really mind-bending conclusion, we're left with a profound challenge. The argument, step by step, makes sense. So the real question is, what are we supposed to do with it? And that's the question I want to leave you with today. When you're faced with something like this, a logical argument that leads to a conclusion that just feels wrong in your gut, what do you question first? Is there a flaw somewhere in the logic we just walked through? Or is that deep primal intuition we all have that life is a precious gift maybe just one of those psychological biases talking? There's no easy answer, but just wrestling with the question itself is what makes this whole idea so important. Thanks for exploring it with me.